Motorsport Advancement Crusade presents Motorsports Unlimited.
Hi, I'm Angie Kay. Welcome to Motorsports Unlimited Part 134. Today's show is Act 2 of our look at offshore boating and boat racing. If you will recall, last week Andrea, Jan, and Chris took a ride in a brand new offshore thunderboat. Let's take a look. Following their ride, we looked at some of the technical details of an offshore boat. This week, we're going to start with a glimpse of how one of these awesome boats is constructed. Let's join Janet Mailer as she searches for the right questions to ask.
Bob, we were told not to touch anything in here. Why is that?
Because we're standing in the fiberglass layup shop.
Let's get Bill in here because I'm out of questions. Let's have him answer the question.
Well, that was very honest of you. Let me give you a good follow-up question is, so what that we're standing in front of the fiberglass shop? Let me walk past in front of you, excuse my stepping in front of your camera shot. Yeah, why do we have to worry about it in the fiberglass shop, although I know?
Because fiberglass itches when it's ground on.
Yeah, it make you crazy after a while.
Yeah.
Okay, I am very impressed. You guys actually, I'm again, I don't want to be redundant on this thing, but I am so surprised that there is a shop here in the Chicago area that builds offshore boats. I mean, it just seems so unlikely to me, but not only that, you build them from the ground up, and if we can, I'm going to walk around, I'll be right back to you a little bit, and I'm going to holler over you, holler what it is. If we can get our camera shot over here a little bit by what Andrea is standing by, this is the mold for what?
The 32 catamaran.
The 32 catamaran, the top or the bottom?
The top.
Okay, this is the top of the 32-foot catamaran. I'm going to step back to where Christine is. Christine, what do you think you're standing in front of?
A pickle fork? No.
Would you stop with
No,
that
it's a
pickle?
cat-
Everything
no,
with
it's a
2 points on
catamaran.
it isn't a pickle fork.
No, it's a catamaran.
It's a catamaran. You noticed that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Is it the top or the bottom?
The bottom.
Very good. That was very good. And what length is this, Bob?
This is the 24 Lightning Express.
Okay, this is the 24, this is the boats that we were just standing by, the two, the yellow one and the white one. This is the mold, and it's got a piece laid up in it, and I'm going to tell our audience right off the bat that I don't see any chopper gun stuff at all. This is all cloth layup.
Right, the whole boat is hand-laid.
Okay, and we have explained chopper guns to our audience before. We're going to presume that they remember what they are. We understand what you give up with a chopper gun. It's a real high-speed production method. It's fast and quick, but you do give up strength, means you have to make it thicker, and it comes out a little bit heavier for a given amount of strength. Close to right?
Right, and there's no way to control. Some spots come out thicker than others, and there's no strength at all in it. It's more for the production boats and the smaller boats.
Okay, so when you get to these big, high-buck racing craft, you've really got to pay attention to the strength-weight ratio.
Yeah, the strength of the boat and the weight of the boat is very critical. And while we build a boat, it's made out of a composite. We use a core center in the boat, and we use bi-directional and tri-directional fiberglasses versus the normal matte woving type of fiberglass that.
Okay, let me see if I can streamline that for you a little bit. What he is saying is that there are a variety of fiberglasses. The strongest ones are unidirectional fiberglasses with the strands all running in one direction. But that means you have to know what you're doing when you're putting this together to make sure you get the strands going in the right direction for the strength that you're looking for?
Right, exactly.
Okay, this is very much, in fact, this is how carbon fiber work is done. And that was the next part of the question is, do you do carbon fiber at all?
On the race boats, on the race catamarans, we use carbon fiber and Kevlar, or we can build a boat just out of carbon fiber itself.
Okay, when you get involved with something like carbon fiber, then we're talking autoclave. That I haven't seen. If you've got one, we want to show it to our audience.
No, we don't have one.
Okay, bet you'd like to have one.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do, vacuum bag them?
Yeah, we vacuum bag them.
Okay, also just a more time-consuming, difficult way to do it, but certainly very effective. Now, I've got something else because, again, as our audience knows, I cannot stand keeping the pretty girls out of the pictures long, so I'm going to walk over here. I'll be right back. Debbie, come on over here, please. I found out something about Debbie when we were setting this up, stand right next to Bob there. It turns out you happen to be an expert in fiberglass layup. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't been involved directly in the layup. I have helped wax the molds a couple of times.
Bingo. That was the important part. Our audience should know, and we're going to do a show about fiberglass, about how to lay up fiberglass and all that. We've got a couple of people set up. In fact, we've the Sunray Corvettes. We've done a couple of shows with them, and these guys are fiberglass experts, and we're going to do this with our audience to run them through this. They should know that one of the most difficult parts about fiberglass work is that you've got the molds have to be waxed 6 times before you lay the fiber, at least before you lay the fiberglass in, right?
6 to 10.
Yeah. It's no fun, is it?
No, it's hard work.
It really is hard work, but I've got news for you. You wouldn't believe how hard work it is if you don't do it.
That's true. You wouldn't want to face that nightmare.
Yeah, you know what would happen.
It would stick.
Yeah, you couldn't get the piece out of the mold. Now you can throw the piece and the mold away. Have I got it about right, Bob?
Exactly true.
Okay, now, have you had her doing any of the work with the roller yet? Or let me ask you, Debbie, you're standing, I'm talking past you, I'm sorry. Have you done the work with the roller?
No, I have not.
Well, if you think the wax part, I don't know, with a chopper gun, the roller part is real hard. How about with the matte layup? Is it just as much work?
It's just that much work as with the chopper gun.
Okay, so it doesn't lessen, I thought because the way the chopper gun sprays the glass on, I thought maybe that's what gets all the air in there that you have to work out, but it's just as much of a problem with the matte layup?
The chopper gun sprays and puts a lot of air in there, and you still got to work out areas and that type of stuff.
But you're saying it's the same thing with the matte layup?
Yeah, with the matte layup, you have more control over it, and you could roll it out easier and get all the air out when you put the piece down in the boat.
Okay, so you're saying it's actually easier to do the rollout with the matte layup?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Christine?
Bob, how long does it actually take to finish a boat from beginning, from scratch, from beginning to end?
Good question. Are we talking about putting the engines in and everything else?
The whole boat?
Okay, from the time you decide to start hammering and nailing till you're ready to drop one in the water, how much time are we talking about?
The catamaran, the 24 catamarans take about 6 weeks to build from start to finish.
And how about the big guy that the girls were riding around on today?
That was a special project that we did for because it's a high-speed boat and it was all special. That boat took 8 months to build, 2 guys.
Boy, it really is beautiful. That's some kind of a boat. Let me walk over here and talk to Angie for a minute because Angie didn't get to ride in the boat, did you, Angie?
How many times are you going to rub that in, Bill?
When you see this footage with these action shots, boy, are you going to be sorry.
I wanted to ride in them. I really did. It sounded like fun.
Yeah, it was. The girls had a great time. Bob, one more question. If we can get the camera to swing around this way, what are we looking at over here? You can just holler. Matter of fact, come on down here with me. What are we looking at here?
This is the 24 deck that we have right here, and my guys are in the process of right now is putting the core material down in the boat. That goes in between two schedules of fiberglass.
Okay, let me explain that to our audience. What we're talking about here is that, and this is the main reason for doing this is to add strength, and if there's another reason, jump right in. To add strength, this is actually sort of a composite construction in that we have a layer, I presume 2 or 3 layers of fiberglass mat, then we put a foam core in between it, and then lay up more fiberglass mat on top of it. Do I have it about right?
Yes, exactly.
Right, and that sandwich is very strong. In fact, in aircraft construction, they've used this rather extensively with the aluminum honeycombs, where they've got a sheet of aluminum, then the honeycomb stood on end. It's very much, I guess the best way to explain it to our audience is like a beehive, that kind of a honeycomb, stood on end, and maybe a quarter-inch thick, half-inch thick, 2 inches thick, with another slice of aluminum on it, and it is incredibly stiff considering its weight.
Exactly. We use a lot of that in the race boats.
Okay, another show that we're going to do with our audience one of these days is we want to talk to them about chassis design on race cars and motorcycles and things like that. And one of the things and this is just a question that occurs to me, is you may or may not be aware, I don't know how heavily involved you are with cars, that it is absolutely essential that a chassis for a car or a motorcycle be as stiff as humanly possible to make it so it doesn't add any suspension to the vehicle that you don't know about and can't control. In other words, you want the suspension to do all of the work so that you can dampen it the way you want to dampen it and have the angles and the geometry the way you want it to do it, and you sure don't want the chassis twisting, confusing the whole deal after you set everything else up so carefully. My question is, do boats, is it important that I guess we could call the hull the chassis, is it important that that be stiff, or do you design it a different way? Because there really isn't any suspension except the water, I guess. I don't know. Does the question make sense?
Well, the boat does work exactly like a chassis. It's got leverage and everything else that it has to work with, and the cantilever and everything off the transom. The boat has to be stiff because the two sponsons have to stay together so they don't sever themselves apart.
Okay, so it is important then that the entire hull is extremely stiff and rigid.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you're not trying to make them flexible for some handling reason. You want them stiff.
No, we want them stiff. We put bulkheads and stringers and everything else in the boat so it all interlocks itself together and makes one unit.
Okay, I think we've looked, and by the way, so I can tell our audience what we're looking at is this is the top of one of those catamarans, like the yellow and white one that we looked at, and behind Christine over there is the bottom of it, and when these things are cured and trimmed and everything else that has to be done, and you pop these pieces out of these molds, you do like a clamshell. This one gets fiberglass together with that one, and we have a complete hull.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Folks, we are going to take a look at just a killer boat. You're going to love this thing. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
It's difficult to visualize exactly how the beautiful boats come out of these less than aesthetically pleasing molds. We are hoping to do a program in the future showing how the fiberglass is laid up and, when cured, how the pieces are removed from the mold and put together, forming the graceful hulls. Now let's get back to fully assembled boats and take a look at Bob Oetringer's own personal race boat, American Obsession.
I'm Chris, and I've been given the honor to ask Bob about this beautiful race boat. Bob, you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Well, this is the other half of what I do. I ocean race. The boat to our back is a 38-footer that we run in open class. Last year we took 5th place overall. It's got a set of 730 horse Pro Marine motors in it. The boat will run 95 miles an hour, and because of its length we could run through about 8 footers with this boat, with maintaining about 75 miles an hour.
Are you racing with the boat this year, Bob?
No, we're not. We're right in the process of changing boats. We're going to be racing a 32 Cat next year.
Oh, you're telling me that this one's obsolete.
Well, it's not obsolete. We're just changing classes. In '87, I won the World Championship in D Sportsman, and we're going to go back into D Sportsman to take the title back, hopefully, in one of our boats.
ask a question?
Sure, Ann.
Do you race in world offshore boat racing or contests, or is this just within the U.S.?
We race within the U.S., but we have world championships at the end of every season. It's the world championship, and people from overseas, from New Zealand, from Monaco, from England, they all come in and compete.
Okay, I just wanted to know.
Okay, I think Bill has a few questions he'd like to interject here.
Yeah, I sure would, but before we get into any questions about the boat, as a matter of fact, and you know, you can see why we couldn't pass this one up. We had to come out and look at this, right, Angie?
Right.
Yeah, this is big time, and I really like this. Bob, once and for all, I want to explain to our audience this whole cigarette boat business. Now, I'm going to tell them, and you correct me if I'm wrong, or add whatever is necessary. Everyone seems to know the word or the term cigarette boat. You hear it mentioned on the radio, you hear people talking and all that. What I didn't know is that cigarette boat is a brand. Cigarette is a brand?
It is.
Okay, now, it has become, apparently from Miami Vice, and apparently that's something, and I must say, I've got to confess, I have never seen the show. But everyone tells me that they talk about cigarette boats and that. Angie, do you see the show?
I've watched it, yeah.
Okay, is that something they would mention on there?
Well, I wouldn't be familiar, I wouldn't understand what they meant by cigarette boat if I hadn't heard it brought up before.
Okay. The point is that it's something like a crescent wrench. There's lots of adjustable wrenches. We've got Craftsman and Snap-on and any number of brands of crescent wrenches, of adjustable wrenches, but they're all called crescent wrenches. For some reason, the name's stuck, and maybe they originated and all that. There are other things that pick up that nomenclature, that brand thing. What we want the folks to know and understand, though, that is not a class of boat. That is a brand of boat. And when we talk about, in other words, there are cigarette boats. There are probably, I'm guessing you can tell me, there are cigarette boats that, in a wide variety of classes. The one that most people think about is called offshore what?
Offshore boats.
Yeah, but offshore, is there what is like the Popeyes boat or something like that? I mean, what class would that, is that offshore modified, or is it just, because there are several classes of offshore boats, right?
Right. There's super boat, open class, then there's modified, pro stock, and stock, and then there's the sportsman racing, which is getting real big. It's A, B, and C, and D sportsman.
Okay, and Cigarette would make boats for what classes?
They would make for any one of the sportsman classes, and they would make open class and super boat.
Okay, so we are talking about these really big boats then, right?
Right.
Okay, I really wanted to clear that up because when I was telling folks, you know, boy, we found this place, they make these big offshore boats, but somebody said, oh, cigarette boats. I said, no, as I understand it, Cigarette is a brand. These are thunder boats, but thunder boats are the same as cigarette boats in that they run their offshore boats, right?
Right. They're our competitor. And the word cigarette is just a generic name for it. They were one of the first ones out in the late 60s.
What are some other brands? I cannot imagine there's too many people that make these huge boats. It can't be that big of a market. So can you give us an idea of some other?
The other names would be Magnum, Formula, Wellcraft, Apache.
So there are several brands of these things then?
Oh, there is. It's limited, but there is.
Okay, as a matter of fact, hopefully while we're doing this right now, while we're talking about the cigarette boat business, because you've got one and it's out of our lighting, what we've got lit here and everything, but you've got a cigarette boat over here called Warhawk. How big is this?
This is a 35-foot cigarette.
35 foot. Okay, that's not, I was expecting it to be like over 40 feet. Some of them, like Popeyes, wouldn't that be like over 40 feet, or am I wrong?
They make them up to 42 feet. But this one happens to be just 35. This is a gentleman's pleasure boat here.
Okay, and one of the guys, oh, that's another thing I want to talk about. I tend to think of offshore boats, I bet you do too because you're a racer. I tend to think of them all as the racing boats, like what we have behind here. But apparently something has happened in this field very much like, well, for example, if you were into motorcycle racing, if you took an XR 750 Harley and they manufactured some of them with lights on them and that you can put license plates on. They're still race bikes, but they're street legal. That's kind of what's happened to this offshore racing boat thing, isn't it? You've kind of developed, my guess is most of the Thunderboats, or the cigarettes for that matter, will probably never be raced.
Right. We make pleasure boats, they make pleasure boats, but we also have the versions in race boats. Everything that's a pleasure boat is a race boat in our line.
Okay, what I'm getting at then is that while we all tend to think of the big race boats like the cigarettes, and I'll say the Thunderboats, okay, the fact of the matter is most of them are probably not the race versions that people would see generally, right?
All right, the pleasure version would have a small head down below. It would have V-berths for sleeping. It'd have couches in it. Some of them have microwaves, colored TVs down below. They have every option that the house has.
Okay, and the race versions have what, zip?
The race versions, like this one behind me, is nothing below, just wood bulkheads. That's it, no cabin.
No cabin at all, it's just very stark and very typical race-oriented. Okay. Listen, as we said when we started doing this program, there's so much here to look at. In fact, it's killing me right now because we've got more than enough tape, and my camera guy is doing this finger like this, so we've got to wrap this up. And you guys have got one of those V8 outboards all taken apart back here. I'd love to show that to our audience. You've got so many goodies laying around here, it makes me crazy. We can't do it. Bob, we want to thank, first of all, I'm sure the girls want to thank you, except Angie, for the ride today.
I'd like to thank you for having someone pick me up so I could finish the show, even though I couldn't ride on the boat.
Okay, we've got to go. It's been a real pleasure. Girls, I hope everybody, did you have a good time on the boat?
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, it was great. Folks, I'm Bill Wildt. We're going to see you again next week, and until next week, I want to thank you for watching.
Don't leave yet, the show isn't over. Let's continue with a look at Bob Oetringer and American Obsession in action.
All right, Bob Oetringer in the American Obsession, a 38-foot Cougar V in beautiful red, white, and blue colors. This boat is currently in 4th place in open class. And Bob Oetringer earlier on told us that he was waiting for rough water. Well, I think he got it today. Now, what can he do with it? That's the question. The boat is powered by Pro Motors, and they're excellent engines. And this big Cougar likes these seas. They're cutting through it beautifully. The team, of course, the driver is Vance Schaff. The navigator is John Luisi, and on the throttles is Robert Oetringer. All these guys are from suburbs of Chicago. So this is basically their home seas. They're across the lake from home. And they are just thundering along in this race rig by Midwest Performance Boats, American Obsession. This is a well-known rough water hull. These big Cougars take big waves quite well. The seas are kicking up out there, aren't they?
Yes, they are. We're hoping for at least 4 to 5s out there. We'll see what happens.
So you want the roughest water you can find?
The rougher the better.
You don't want to take the cats on in flat water, do you?
No, that's when we sit back and just kind of enjoy ourselves.
Their motto, no guts, no glory. They're showing some guts now as they thunder through these waves. And we made a course error here. We see a lot of boats taking off looking for the turnboat. Some navigational problems. I see boats going in every different direction, searching for a mysterious turnboat.
As you can see, the offshore boats are truly spectacular. We found them so interesting that we returned to Lake Bluff after the first offshore boat show aired to continue our conversation with Bob Oetringer.
That's right, girls, we are back, and I shouldn't say girls like I know exactly what I just taped because we haven't taped the piece that just introduced this piece yet, but we're back in Lake Bluff, and we've got our friend Bob, I'm going to say it, Oetringer, am I saying it right, or is it Oetringer? We've been arguing.
Oetringer.
Oetringer?
Yes.
Well, we've said it, every one of us was wrong then. Anyhow, this is Bob Oetringer, and last week's program we went into the Adrenaline, which is a boat that you guys built, right?
Yes, it is.
And we taped a piece about this, which is your personal racing boat, right?
Uh-huh.
And I ended up that I had enough to tape to do like 1.5 shows, and I wanted to do 2 full shows. And this always gives us a good opportunity when we stop back after we've had a chance to air a program, because we get questions from our audience, and it gives us a good opportunity to talk about a few things that maybe well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you something else. After I watch the footage several times when I'm editing it, I get questions that I'd forgotten to ask also. So this is a combination of questions from our audience and also questions from myself. I want to talk, before we talk more, and we just got done, the way the show is put together, we just got done doing a piece about this boat, and we're going to talk more about it. But I do have a question with our discussion with catamarans versus deep Vs from last week. You remember the discussion?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Something that we didn't make clear about the handling characteristics of the boat, and I want, if I remember what you said, and I'm not sure we said it on camera, you were saying that the catamarans corner very flat. They don't lean like the V does, correct? Did I get that correct?
Right. They don't lean into the corners. They kind of just go around the corner like a sports car would.
Right. As a matter of fact, we did a personal watercraft show, about a month ago, something like that, where we taught some of the girls how to ride one of the new style personal watercraft. You know, the jet ski started it all about 15 years ago. All right, and this was called a Phase 3. It was originally called a Phaser, and then it had a Phase 1, Phase 2. Now it's called a Phase 3. And it is a pickle fork design. Now, it's not a catamaran in the sense of what you were showing us that had two complete hull Vs all the way back. It was a pickle fork that kind of blended back into a sort of a flat bottom in the back with a jet drive. Are you familiar with that design at all?
Right. Well, on that type of personal watercraft, that's just more for making it stable. The catamarans, like was on the show before this, that's more for the lift and that stuff. It actually acts as the wing as in the tunnel for lift.
Okay, the part that interested me, though, when you were saying how flat the catamarans will corner rather than like the deep V, actually, and the girls were even saying, in fact, Andrea, you were quite taken by how much the boat leans when you make the turn. Okay, and we don't have a mic over there, but we'll get you in on this conversation in a few seconds. I want to get this pinned down, though. When I was talking to the fellow that was a real expert about the Phase 3, he was saying that design, that particular design, because of the pickle fork design, or he was almost calling it kind of almost a catamaran design up front, he says on how would we say it, non-turbulent water, flat water, that boat will corner so hard. And it corners flat. It doesn't lean like the jet ski. It corners flat. And you sit on them, you don't stand on them. You sit on them like a snowmobile. He says it will corner so hard that you literally will be flipped off the boat or off the personal watercraft long before the watercraft would flip over. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Oh, yeah, because they'll actually, in the corners, they'll hook real hard, like they're on rails.
Yeah, he used that expression, hooking, okay.
Right. They'll hook just like they're on rails. When the V-bottom, the way the V is and everything else, the boat will actually lean so far that you can just reach over and just touch the water.
Right, and apparently, I guess what it interested me after you said that, I was thinking about it because these boats are so large and so big. Somehow I tend to think, because I've raced motorcycles for so many years, that there's some advantage to leaning into the corners the way the V-bottoms do. But if I understand what you're saying, as far as going around the corners, that the catamarans or the pickle fork design, and maybe that's not fair, let's just talk about the catamaran, that would go around corners faster than a V-bottom?
Oh, yeah. They'll go right around the corner. You can go right in, and actually some of the hydroplanes and the Formula One boats and that will do like what they call a slingshot turn. They'll go right into the buoy and they'll snap the steering, and the boat will completely do a 180 and go back the opposite direction with tremendous G-force.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I understand that some of the Formula One boats, which are essentially kind of, forgive my lack of technical knowledge on it, but they're sort of miniature catamarans, the tunnel boats. Would you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are.
Okay, and I understand that the drivers can experience as much as 3 Gs side force on the turns in those things.
Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible, 3 Gs. I mean, I understand that one of the problems they have is that the drivers of those boats get so badly bruised up inside of them just because of the extreme G, even though they're braced in quite well.
Yeah, they get thrown against the sides of the boat when they turn. That's just tremendous. The catamarans that we have don't have a 3G turn, but they have pretty close to it. If you, as hard as you can turn the wheel, the boat will just keep turning.
That's really incredible, and that is, in addition to that, and again, I want to tell our audience, the other thing I noticed with that Phase 3 is one of the problems, when the girls were inexperienced, one of the problems that they were having with it is they would plow it into an upcoming wave, and the nose will dive on those things, which you say is a problem with the catamarans as opposed to the deep Vs.
Right, they're all basically in the same family.
Right, so I guess what I want our audience to know is that these are engineering principles, and we talk about that. It doesn't make any difference if we're talking about cars or airplanes or boats for that matter. You don't get something for nothing. You give up some characteristics to gain some other characteristics.
Exactly.
Okay, now, now that we've just pumped up the glories of the catamaran, and we're sitting on we're sitting on your own personal boat, which happens to be, what, a 38-foot deep V?
Yes, it's 38 V bottom.
Okay, what we want to do here is, one of the things we didn't explain in the show is that that these boats take 3 people to operate. And Christine, raise your hand. Okay, now Christine, what position is she in?
She's in the navigator seat.
Okay, and we're going to have you explain that to her, but we're going to move our camera in order to do that. And Janet, raise your hand. It's Janet Mailer. What seat is she in?
She's in the driver's seat.
And Andrea, raise your hand. And what seat is she in?
She's in my seat,
And what seat is that?
the throttle man seat.
I understand that's the most important job on these craft.
Yes, that is the most important.
Okay, we're going to explain why it is and why because one would think automatically the driver would be the most important, but you're exactly correct. I've made some inquiries, and in fact, the throttle man, it's the toughest job and the one you have to pay attention to most of the time and all that.
Yes.
Okay, folks, don't go away. We're going to move the camera, and we'll be right back.
It's hard to describe just how big these boats are until you're standing right next to them. You may have noticed that, despite the huge size of Bob's shop, we were literally in the rafters. Before we go any farther, it's time for us to introduce ourselves.
Hi, I'm Andrea.
And I'm Jan.
I'm Chris.
I'm Angie.
While Bill and Bob were talking in the opening of the interview, they mentioned G-forces. This provokes some questions. Let's listen.
As I've said many times before on the show, one of the most important functions that the girls serve is that they give us sort of a sense of what the general public understands or doesn't understand about some of the things that we explain on Motorsports Unlimited. The girls aren't afraid to ask questions, and that gives us an idea. Sometimes those of us in the motorsport community, as I've explained before, we are so intimately familiar with the terms that we use and the activities that we engage in that we think everybody is. And very often those things that we think everyone knows, everyone doesn't know. Andrea asked a very important question after our opening discussion here this evening, and the other girls jumped right in, and they didn't have an answer for it either, and it's something that I would assume that everyone would know. Andrea, what did you ask?
What is a G?
Okay, what you're talking about is we were talking about G-forces before, right?
Yeah, whatever that is.
Okay, without getting overly scientific, because I don't want the audience's eyes to glaze over, and let me just explain it this way. That when, for example, if you were on a swing in a playground, and you're swinging back and forth hard, as the swing gets out to the end of its stroke, you can actually feel your own weight increasing because of the centrifugal force that you're swinging on the end of a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Okay, and also if you've ever seen ice skaters, when they add another one to a line, they're going around in a circle, and the last one really has to catch up. You guys have all seen it? And it's very difficult to hold on the last person out there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What that is what we're dealing with there is the force of gravity. And there has to be a way of measuring the force of gravity, some way that we can say it to say how much force is out there. For example, in the skating example, and Angie, you were a skater, so maybe you remember a little of that. Those that are very close in, they're scribing a very small circle, so there's not a lot of gravitational pull on them. And maybe in that case, maybe you could measure that and say that's 1/2 G. It means that the weight added to the person is maybe 1/2 their body weight, something like that. And by the time you get out to the end of that line, you might be at 2.5 Gs or something like that, which means that your body weighs, and we're talking about force going to the outside, 2.5 times your body weight. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and very often these things are very important because, for example, when they take and blast off with spacecraft and things like that, the human body can only stand so much G-force, or it literally will squash. So these are very important numbers. Dragsters. This is something, and Bob, of course, was involved with drag racing. He understands G-forces very well, and some of the dragsters that the big top fuel dragsters on their launch, they might experience 3.5 Gs, which is a tremendous G-force to absorb. And when we were saying that, I want you to think about that. If you guys have ever seen these big top fuel dragsters and understand how hard with 2,000 or 3,000 horsepower in a very light vehicle and those huge slicks, how hard they leave the line, and they're experiencing 3.5 Gs. And what we just got done saying is the tunnel hull bolts on their turns, the drivers are experiencing 3.5 Gs. That gives you an idea of just, of course, with them it's sideways now. It's not an acceleration force, it's a sideways force because they turn so hard. So that is just a way of measuring what G is gravity. It means 1 gravity, 2 gravities, 3 gravities, 3.5 gravities. Does that make, am I explaining it well?
Yeah, I got it.
Everybody agrees, not just because we're on camera. We all, Angie, you look quizzical. Is that good? Okay. Now, I just wanted to get the, wait a minute, Christine, get the mic over to you.
Could I ask the question that I had still from last week? Remember I had asked you, why does the crew stand in a V-hull and sit in a catamaran?
Bob, I'm going to get this mic right over to you. You want to take that now? I was going to take that in a little bit, but let's do it now.
The reason that the crew will stand in the V-bottom is to take the shock when the boat hits, so you can take it up in your legs and that stuff. And the catamaran has got the air in the tunnel, acts as a shock absorber, so you're allowed to sit down in the boat. Plus, the catamarans are lower profile than a V-bottom are, so you want to get down as low as you can down to the bottom of the boat in a catamaran.
Why is that, Bob? To lower the center of gravity of the overall mass?
Yes.
Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to have the girls explain each, or you're going to explain to the girls, I'm going to put you on the spot and have you explain to each of the girls the positions that they're occupying. And by the way, this is a 38-foot boat, folks, and let me point out something. Its people holding ability is about 2.5 feet wide by 2.5 feet by 8 feet, and that's it.
Exactly right.
Not exactly what we would call a real efficient use of space.
No, it's just enough just to hold you in place.
Okay, but you need a boat this big, what, because of the waves and the water that it operates in?
Yeah, to span the waves on it.
Okay, folks, you're going to enjoy this explanation, and I'm going to tell you in advance a little trick thing that the most important person in the crew of an offshore racer is not the driver, as I think every one of us, including myself, would expect, but the throttle man. It's the most difficult job, and I think when you hear the explanation, you're going to be surprised by this. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Now that we all understand G-force, let's listen as Chris finds out about the navigator's job.
Bob, I understand I'm standing in the navigator position of the boat. Would you please explain to me and our audience what that entails?
Well, the job of the navigator is to take a chart, keep us on course, and how he does that is that he has a compass in front of him, and also the driver has a compass in front of him. And they pick a course and a heading, and we would run 15 to 20 miles before we'd have to pinpoint a buoy or a turn-boat on a course. And running at speeds of excess of 80 miles an hour, it's hard to keep track of what's going out there. So
You mean there are markers out there for you to follow?
yeah, there's courses set up by the people that put the race on.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
And the navigator is to keep a heading and tell the driver which way to go by his compass in relation to the driver's compasses.
In other words, if you're starting a race, and as you said, there are buoys and places where you can locate where you're at, do you know this ahead of time, and is this like charted out ahead of time, like maybe if you were flying a plane you would have a flight plan? Do you know this ahead of time?
Oh yeah, they give you 2-3 days ahead of time, and they put the buoys out there a day ahead of time, so you can go out there and actually get a feel of the course, even though it's 80 miles or 160 miles.
Okay, thanks a lot, Bob.
Now it's Jan's turn to learn what the driver does.
Bob, I'm standing in the driver's position. Explain, what does the driver do?
Well, the driver does a couple of things. One, he steers the boat by the direction of the navigator. He also has to read the waves that are in front of him so that he doesn't go off course or run into a wave that maybe he can avoid a little bit. And he also transfers fuel. He moves, there's several fuel tanks in the boat, and he transfers, as we're going underway, fuel to the front to the back.
I have a question, Janet. How is the information between the driver and the navigator? I mean, how do they communicate with each other? I mean, how does the navigator tell the driver you're going off course, or, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, we have intercom systems in our helmets, just like they use in a helicopter. And we can talk at 90 miles an hour just like we're talking right now. So we communicate, all three of us, at any given time, either cutting a joke or saying we're going to stand this thing on end, or you're going to getting too close to another boat. We keep in full communication with each other.
Okay, so then all three of you are fully responsible for what happens in the boat.
Oh, yeah.
What is the difference between a helmsman and driver? I heard someone saying earlier, helmsman. What does that refer to, Bob?
Thanks. It's basically the same thing. A helmsman's the person that would direct, steer the boat or navigate or direct the boat.
Okay.
I noticed these compartments are kind of small. Are they custom made for each individual driver? I mean, does the same team race a certain boat, or?
The compartment that each one of these, this is called a bolster, and this certain boat has what we call the adjustable bolster. The backs of these seats are all adjustable, plus the width is made for each one of us has got our own compartment, and it's adjusted to us. So when we put our life jackets on and we slide down into the boat, we actually lock in there so we don't bounce around.
Okay, thanks. We all try to help each other when we're asking about things. Asking about things we know nothing about and are trying very hard to learn. Now let's listen as Andrea tries to understand the difficulty of the throttle man's job.
Bob, I'm in the throttleman's position. I hear it's the hardest and most important part. What exactly is the job?
Well, the job of the throttle man is to throttle the motors up and through the waves. And what I do in the boat is I work the throttles, and I also adjust the outdrives and the K-planes on the back of the boat. I monitor the motor, the oil pressure, the water temperature, the tachometers, the two tachometers up there. That's the whole ignition panel. I basically run the whole boat from this position right here. I can watch the drives to see how far they go in and out, and basically work the throttles to make sure that when the boat comes off the waves, when it's in the air, that I pull the throttles back to a certain position that I feel comfortable with. And as the boat re-enters the waves, I'll accelerate full throttle to make the boat accelerate off the other wave. Or sometimes when it's calm out, I just put the throttles wide open and I wedge a towel in there and I kind of sit back and watch what's going on.
What happens if you don't, how can you say this? If you mess up somehow and you don't do it on time or whatever, what happens to the engine? Or?
They freewheel, and if they freewheel, they have a tendency of blowing up. So it's a very important part to get off the throttles when the boat leaves the water, but it's also important that when the boat leaves the water at a certain time to get off the throttles, because if you get off too fast, the boat will drop down in the trough. So I actually have to make the boat ricochet off of the waves.
Okay, thank you very much.
Of course, we can't keep Bill out of it for very long. Let's listen as he sums up.
Well, Bob, I want to take a moment to recap. I've learned some things listening to you explain this to the girls. I can understand now, and I want to explain a little bit more to our audience, how significant the throttle man's position is. It seems to me, based on what you were saying, that your task essentially is to read the waves, feel the boat in the water so that you know when the props are in the water and when, not just when they come out, but when they're about to come out and when they're about to re-enter. I'm guessing that what you want to do is give it a good shot off of one wave, pull the throttles back so you don't over rev the motors when the props come out of the water, but nail it quickly enough so that as soon as that they're in the water again, you've got power into them. Am I guessing close at all?
Yep, you can be a throttle man.
No, but what I'm getting at is it reminds me very much, I raced motorcycles for many years, and very often if you're on a loose track, flat tracking, you have to read the track just like that. If you're going to be skipping across some ruts and everything, you also don't want to over rev the motors there, especially if you're coming off the corner at 8 grand on a motor that's going to bend valves at 85. You want to make sure you lift slightly if you're going to come into a rise or something, and based on your description, it's kind of the same thing.
Mm-hmm, exactly. What I do is I have to actually, most of the time, I'm actually feeling the waves and that stuff, and sometimes I'll just take and work the propellers right from one wave to the other and keep the hull dry as dry as I can. But sometimes I have to make the boat actually slingshot where it's coming off the crest of a wave, say a 6-foot wave on the top of the crest. The boat's just starting to come off the top of the crest, and I'll give it everything it's got, and the boat will actually just leave. When it leaves, the boat will go, depending on the attitude, how I put the boat, because I can adjust the attitude of the boat.
Right, let me stop you right there. That's also the throttle man's job, though, is working the K-planes that we talked about, and also, if I understood your explanation correctly, you're also doing the out drives as to what angle they're in the water.
Right, because I adjust the K-planes, which adjust my nose up and down. It adjusts the left and right of the boat. If we're getting hit by a cornering sea, which is waves by the side, I'll adjust the tabs one down farther than the other to keep the boat level so that the V will chop the waves, not be hitting on the one side of the V or the other. And the other thing is to keep the drives. If it's real rough, I'll tuck the drives down in, and when it starts getting calm out, if I got about a 2 to a 3 foot chop out there, I'll start kicking the drives out as far as I can to get the nose up to get the most amount of speed. The boat with the drives in will run 80 miles an hour, and with the drives tucked out, the boat will run 95 to 98.
Okay, and that's all a function of what we are, I guess, calling a throttle man, for lack of a better description, but it's a whole lot more than throttle man. And I also want our audience to know that I've made some inquiries since we did the first show that you saw last week, and Bob is one of the very best in the country at this, and this is the right guy to listen to as to how this is done. And I don't mean to embarrass you, but and I know you wouldn't say that yourself, but I was interested to find this information out. But yes, Christine.
Bob, how long did it take you to learn everything that you just described so that you had a real rhythm going? Because you're talking about an awful lot of things that you're in charge of.
Well, to get the feel for the throttling and that stuff, it came from the years of using my pleasure boat and that stuff. But about 2 years took me to get a good handle on it, and basically right now, the way I have everything down, I got a good pattern down on how to drive these boats.
Okay, because as you were explaining, I was thinking about it from racing motorcycles, and just picturing myself coming off of a corner, particularly on a rough track, where you're coming off of a corner and you're trying to give as much throttle as you can, because obviously you want to accelerate as hard as you can, but you also don't want to give it too much throttle, so when the thing is maybe skipping over some ruts or at least some undulations, you don't want the rear wheel just lighting up. First of all, you lose traction and the bike can get out from underneath you real quickly, but beyond that, you can also over rev the motor and bend a valve or something like that. And I started thinking about it, if I had somebody else doing the throttle work and sensing all that, and all I was doing was more or less pointing the bike as a rider, had somebody else doing it, that would have made my job a ton easier.
Exactly. The driver, when he does his thing, that's all he worries about, and the only thing I worry about is keeping the motors together and to keep the boat going. For the water conditions, I keep the boat going as fast as I can.
Okay, Christine?
Bill? Bob, is it the same, the positions and the jobs that the different people do, is it the same in a catamaran?
Yeah, the only thing on the catamaran is because of the balance and being so low down in the boat, and that is, nowadays they're only running 2 people in the boat versus 3, and the driver does the navigating and the steering of the boat, and then the throttle man would do the same thing what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me go a little farther with this. I'm standing now, and everybody's been just needling me. I'm going to be stuck and can't get out of here, and I'm not sure I really appreciate it, but I put up with a lot of abuse on this program, as our audience knows. But this thing is padded to hold me very snugly right up against my hips. And I'm quite sure that the girls had a problem getting out of here. In any event, no problem. But in any event, it's got my hips snug on each side, and we are standing, and in a sense, and I hate to keep relating this to motorcycle racing, but it strikes me as, this part of it strikes me as being similar to motocross, because in flat track, of course, we do something different, but in motocross, of course, you have to keep your knees slightly bent so that your legs actually add as a suspension system in addition to the rest of the suspension system. And it seems, because this is strictly a stand-up thing, and if I understood what you were saying, that your legs have to absorb the shock, that you do this very much like a motocross.
Exactly. We have to keep our legs bent to a certain position to take up some of the shock, because when the boat comes down, sometimes I can't keep the boat just perfectly straight. I might get put off a wave a little bit different. And when the boat comes down, it'll want to drop you down in the boat a couple inches.
Okay, now I would imagine that as the race goes on, because these are long races that you guys run, that you get fatigued, and I can see that it would be a major error if a guy in his fatigue would kind of straighten his legs up and then take a hard hit in a wave.
Yeah, you can break your knees easily in these type of boats. But basically, the way the seats are designed in the bolster, I should say, not the seat.
Right, there's no seat here. I can tell our audience that.
Right, there's no seat. The bolster is designed when we have a full flotation type of safety life vest that we wear. And the way the seats are designed, that's why they're snug, is we actually slide down in here and we push ourselves back into the seats and we lock in, so that when we come off the waves, it's like dropping in an elevator when you feel yourself trying to come up a little bit. Well, this boat drops faster than you do, so you actually get lifted out of the seats. So
wait a minute, girls, you remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They were, in fact, I'm trying to remember who was, you were the one that was, wait, let me get over here, Andrea. You were the one that was hollering something, we got it on the audio part of the thing, that, my God, I'm off the floor, and...
Yeah, in midair is more like it. You're just holding on by your hands, and what's left is left. You're just flying around.
And I think, Janet, you were the one that was concerned that Chris was going to fly out of the boat.
Yeah, it looked like she was going to fly out of the back of the boat.
But you weren't worried.
No.
Okay. One thing I want to talk about real quick, and then I want to get back to this. Let me do this first. Surprisingly, something else that I've learned out here is that most people that buy boats like this don't really use them for racing. This is a pure race boat, but most people would. From what you've told me, most people would buy something like this. First of all, they like the speed of the boat and the power and all that, and the prestige of it, of course. But they want it not for pure racing, so underneath this front area, they have a cabin in it, like that adrenaline boat that that the girls, they'd have the cabin underneath there, which this doesn't have any of that. Right. And in addition to that, you'd have more walk-around room for people in here and all that. Is that correct?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Also, the stand, while it does have the stand-up area like this, it has a seat that kind of swings up in the back portion of this, so that a person can kind of sit and run at a more sane, leisurely pace.
Right, exactly. They swing up and they lock in, so you can sit down in the boat. You know, the full bolsters have no dropout. I mean, no bottoms in them.
Okay, and the other thing that I was thinking about this afterwards, as I said, I edit all this footage myself, and as I'm going through this, of course, you look at frame after frame after frame. I couldn't help but think about the origin of this offshore boat kind of thing, and my own feeling is, I wanted to get your reaction to this, is these things, in a sense, remind me very much of the World War II PT boats.
Yeah, the PT boats were designed to go through rough water at a fast rate of speed.
Right, I remember as a kid, I couldn't have been more than 13, 14 years old, I built a model of a PT boat, and I remember very well in the instructions when you're putting together, it's a plastic model, and I remember very well that they had 4 Packard engines in it, and some of these, like the Popeyes boat, runs 4 engines, right?
Right, the Popeyes boat has 4 naturally aspirated motors in it, and a couple other people are running 4 turbocharged engines in a 50-foot catamaran, and they run about 125 miles an hour, 50 feet long, 14 feet wide.
Okay, I've got a bunch more questions to ask you, and I know we're running out of time on this program because I do this to myself every time. However, since we're out here, we're going to get them, and if we have to, we'll put them in on little pieces on other programs, because I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you, and I'll bounce them. I'll tease our audience with them here in case we can't get them on this show. We'll put them in future shows. But one of the things I wanted to ask, and maybe this exists and we just don't know about it, because as I say all the time on this show, Motorsport gets cheated out of a fair opportunity to be present on television. when we were talking as to why somebody would buy these are outrageously expensive boats and why somebody would have something like this in the Chicago area, as we talked, we would think Miami for sure and maybe California. And as you agreed, most of these boats are built in Miami, some of them in California. This is unusual on Lake Michigan. However, Lake Michigan really offers a beautiful playground for these boats, even if we don't quite think of it that way. And you were saying that on occasion somebody, for example, a businessman might have one at Diversey Harbor, downtown Chicago, and he might decide to take somebody to lunch to St. Joe, Michigan, and back. And how long would it take? I mean, these are 100-mile-an-hour boats. How long would it take to get to St. Joe?
We can get to St. Joe from Waukegan in about 50 minutes.
So it's under an hour to shoot over there, maybe have lunch, and then shoot back.
Oh yeah, we do it all the time.
Okay, that leads me to the question is, as a racer, obviously my first question is, well, how come they don't run races like Diversey Harbor in Chicago to St. Joe and back or something like that? Or maybe they do and I just don't know about it. Or how about, and my imagination runs wild, how about Chicago to Milwaukee or Chicago to Milwaukee and back? Or maybe they already do it. No, that's 90 miles. That's a good haul. My question is, I guess, twofold. Do those races exist and I just don't know about it? Or do they not exist, and if not, why not?
Well, in 1980 they had a race out here on Lake Michigan, and then it went from Chicago to Michigan City and back, and it was sanctioned by the APBA, and they had a good turnout in that stuff, but the politics in the city are what stopped it all. Nowadays they're run in Grand Haven, Michigan, Bay City, Michigan, and Traverse City, and the spectators that were at Grand Haven this year were 700,000, 20,000 boaters.
Wow, and what I would like to do, and again, this is what Motorsport, because we've got a large Chicago audience, and the show will air 4 times in Chicago, and I really want to encourage the city fathers to take a look at this sort of thing. I think this would be great along our lakefront if they ran at least a couple of races a year, maybe once across the lake, or maybe the next time up to Milwaukee and back, something like that. Maybe I think that would be a terrific race and something we could get some city rivalry going on, and maybe somebody would build a boat called the Spirit of Chicago.
Yeah, or the Motorsport Express.
Okay, all right, there you go. Anyhow, we've got to wind this up. We're going to get a few more questions from you. I got some more things to ask you based on questions from people last week. Whether we get them on this show or not, I don't know, but we're going to use them in the future. So if we don't get them this time, folks, we're going to get them. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for this week. In an upcoming show, we'll answer one of our viewers' questions about how one goes about getting one of the huge hulls out of the mold after it cures. And we'll show you Bob Oetringer's toy box.
Everything in this room, I would say we could call, and I'm going to make everybody, we could call boy toys. Would you agree?
Yeah, exactly.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade.
Watching the Motorsports Unlimited each week is a new and interesting way to learn about the motorsport community. Until next week, I'm Andrea Oswald. Thank you for watching.
Until next week, I'm Chris Schutz. Thanks for watching.
This program made possible in part by support from Auto Magic Body Shop located in Franklin Park.
Until next week, I'm Janet Mailer. Thank you for watching.
Until next time, I'm Angie Kay. Thanks for watching.
The Motorsport Advancement Crusade is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation and enhancement of motorsport. We are entirely funded by voluntary contribution. For more information, you can write Motorsport, or you can write the whole thing if you'd like, Motorsport Advancement Crusade, but mail gets to us just fine, addressed Motorsport, P.O. Box 66242, Chicago, Illinois 60666, or just call at 1-312-478-4224. We enjoy hearing from our audience, and we encourage you to call or write.
Until next week, I'm Pam Pollock. Thank you for watching.